They said I stole from the company I built from scratch. One morning, I walked into the office to find my name stripped from every project, my access revoked, and a silent HR team waiting with printed accusations. Numbers I'd never seen were tied to my name, forged transfers, fake vendor invoices, ghost accounts. I remember the smell of burnt coffee in the conference room and the way my pulse slowed when I saw the signatures. Mine, but not mine. Everyone watched as if I was already guilty. I didn't fight back, not yet. Because in that silence, I realized something: whoever framed me didn't just want me fired. They wanted me erased. So I started documenting everything. Every file, every timestamp, every login. They thought they buried me under their lie. They had no idea I was digging them a grave with their own audit trail. Before we dive into the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching this from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and it helps me connect with you all around the world. I was 39 years old, the chief financial officer of a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago called Greybridge Freight Systems. I'd worked there for nearly 12 years, long enough to know the smell of the hallways, the rhythm of the servers, the pattern of invoices that crossed my desk each morning. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, predictable, controlled. I liked control. Numbers obeyed rules, or at least, they were supposed to. That morning, I arrived a little later than usual. 8:47 a.m. The air was heavy with rain, and the city outside the glass lobby shimmered with the gray of early spring. I remember noticing that the receptionist, usually quick to smile, wouldn't meet my eyes. My ID badge beeped red instead of green. One failed scan. Then another. The security guard, Tom, came over, quiet, awkward. "Sorry, Ethan," he said, "I've been told to escort you to HR." Something inside me went cold. No explanation. Just that. When I walked into the HR conference room, 3 people were already waiting: Diane, the HR director, Paul, our CEO, and Marcus, head of internal compliance. On the table were printed spreadsheets, wire transfer screenshots, and a manila folder thick with documents. My name was highlighted in yellow across every page. Paul didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, the kind of performance you give before firing someone you've already condemned. "Ethan," he began, "we've discovered several irregular transactions over the past quarter. Funds totaling $186,000 have been redirected to an account that traces back to your authorization credentials." I remember hearing the number but not understanding it. My mouth moved, but no words came out. I hadn't touched any off-ledger accounts. I hadn't approved anything beyond our usual payroll and vendor transfers. The accusations didn't even make sense, they were sloppy. Wrong vendor names, mismatched dates, signatures copied from older documents. But they looked official enough to fool anyone who didn't know how deeply I tracked every cent that moved through our system. Then Diane said the line that made the room go silent: "Until further notice, you're placed on unpaid administrative leave pending an external audit. Please surrender your company laptop and phone." I didn't argue. Not because I was guilty, but because I could see their minds were already made up. They didn't want answers. They wanted a scapegoat. When I walked out, I noticed how people looked at me, half pity, half disgust. I heard whispers trailing behind me like static: embezzlement, fraud, audit. I was already convicted in the court of rumor. That afternoon, I sat in my car for nearly 2 hours. The rain hammered the windshield, each drop syncing with my heartbeat. I replayed every financial report I'd filed, every authorization code I'd ever used, every staff member who had access to the finance servers. And then it hit me: the CFO credentials weren't just mine. 3 other people had mirrored access for redundancy. Paul, the CEO, had insisted on it 2 years earlier, calling it risk mitigation. In hindsight, that's when the trap was built. That night, I opened my personal laptop and logged into the archived cloud backups I'd been keeping quietly for years. I didn't trust the company's IT after I caught them covering an accounting error once for the CEO's pet project. I wasn't paranoid, just careful. The deeper I went into those backups, the clearer it became: the financial discrepancies didn't start last quarter. They stretched back nearly 18 months. The same pattern: identical amounts moved just under reporting thresholds, routed through temporary holding vendors, then funneled out again. And every one of those fake approvals bore my digital signature. By midnight, I realized what they had done. They hadn't just framed me, they had been using me as cover for over a year. I stared at the screen, numb, the cursor blinking like a pulse. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From calculation. If they wanted a fall guy, they picked the wrong man. Because I knew the system better than anyone. And if they thought they erased me with a few forged spreadsheets, I was about to show them what real accountability looked like. The first week after the accusation felt like a dream that wouldn't end. Not a nightmare, nightmares end when you wake up. This was a cold suspension between reality and ruin. Every morning, I still woke up at 6:30 out of habit, brewed coffee, opened my email, only to remember I no longer had access to anything that made me me. They'd frozen my accounts, revoked every credential, and locked me out of my professional life as if I'd been digitally erased. Even my LinkedIn profile started to attract strange comments, subtle, loaded ones. Tough break, man. Hope you can bounce back. They all knew. The internal leak was deliberate. Someone wanted the stain to spread fast. I received a formal notice by courier 2 days later. A single sheet, confirmation of ongoing investigation into alleged financial misconduct, with a line at the bottom that chilled me: failure to cooperate may result in referral to law enforcement. It wasn't just termination they were hinting at. They were setting me up for prosecution. I tried calling Paul. Straight to voicemail. Marcus, the compliance head, wouldn't answer either. Diane, HR, sent one email reply that might as well have been written by legal counsel: polite, detached, and utterly useless. The isolation was surgical. No one at Greybridge would speak to me directly. I wasn't just fired, I'd become radioactive. For the first few days, I spiraled between disbelief and fury. I replayed board meetings, business trips, those late nights where Paul and I reviewed quarterly forecasts. He'd always trusted me, or at least pretended to. But now, with distance, I remembered small things that hadn't made sense back then. The night he'd called me asking to approve an urgent vendor transfer after midnight, claiming the system was down. The email that came from his assistant with an attachment I never opened because the sender's tone felt off. The day Marcus had suggested simplifying audit logs to reduce redundancy. Each of those moments flickered back now like puzzle pieces I'd ignored. They had built this carefully. And I had handed them the tools to do it. By the end of the week, I received a certified letter, the audit firm assigned to verify the alleged embezzlement, Darrow and Finton LLP, a name I recognized. Small, corporate-friendly, and conveniently one of Paul's regular golfing companions. That's when I realized the audit wasn't to find truth. It was to formalize guilt. Still, I stayed silent. Not because I was broken, but because silence was my weapon. The less I said, the more they revealed. Every night, I opened my private archive, that off-site backup of all Greybridge financial records, synced automatically to a personal cloud I'd paid for myself. A quiet habit of mine, born from distrust. Now, it was my lifeline. On the fourth night, I noticed something odd. In the vendor list from the quarter before my suspension, there was a new name: Kavara Logistics Solutions. It wasn't one of ours. The vendor ID followed the same numbering pattern as our verified accounts, but something about it felt synthetic. No tax ID, no transaction history before that quarter. Just a single payment for $62,400, approved under my credentials. I searched the vendor database, nothing. Then I Googled it. No company website. No registration filings. Nothing but a shell name. I traced the payment routing path using archived transaction metadata. It led to a holding account under Northridge Investments, a known shell used by mid-market firms for confidential transfers. But the account manager? Registered under Paul's initials. That was my first solid thread. Still, I knew better than to act on it immediately. I printed the trail, stored copies in 3 encrypted drives, and mailed one to a friend, Clara, a former compliance officer who'd left the company a year ago after clashing with Marcus. She'd seen how things worked at Greybridge, how evidence was reshaped before board reviews. I didn't tell her everything yet, just that I needed a second pair of eyes on some strange vendor data. The following morning, my personal phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ethan, a calm voice said, "It's best if you stop looking. This will resolve faster that way." Click. No name, no threat, just the tone of someone who already believed I'd lost. That's when the freeze ended. Not officially, but internally. Because in that moment, I stopped feeling powerless. They'd made one mistake: they forgot who built the audit system they were now manipulating. I had the architecture in my head, every data path, every blind spot. If they wanted war in spreadsheets and ledgers, they'd chosen the wrong accountant to frame. The real audit was about to begin, mine. By the second week, I had stopped trying to sleep. My nights had become forensic sessions, a slow excavation of lies buried under months of routine transactions. I worked in silence, the hum of my old desktop filling the room, surrounded by stacks of paper I'd printed out like I was building my own courtroom exhibit. Every sheet was a story, and every story was starting to point the same way. The first crack came from a timestamp. Something so small, so invisible, that only someone who lived inside spreadsheets would notice. The forged transactions that supposedly carried my approval had all been executed at 2:13 a.m., on 3 separate dates. The system allowed administrative transfers around the clock, but I'd never approved a single payment after midnight in my entire tenure. It wasn't a coincidence, someone had automated those transfers through my credentials, exploiting a loophole that bypassed the normal 2-step verification. The signature metadata looked identical to mine, but it wasn't. The signature hash, a coded imprint of digital approval, was off by a single digit. That difference meant one thing: the approvals came from an emulated user environment, not my actual terminal. Whoever did this had access to my login tokens. Tokens that should have been encrypted by compliance. Tokens only Marcus and his team could access. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glow of the monitor. The silence in my apartment was heavy. My pulse slowed, but my thoughts sharpened. Marcus, the man who'd spearheaded my internal investigation, might have been the one planning the evidence to justify it. That realization changed everything. I needed proof, not suspicion, not logic. Proof that could survive courtrooms and corporate denial. So I reached out to Clara, the former compliance officer I'd trusted. We met in a quiet diner off the interstate, one of those places where no one looked up from their plate. She still carried the wary energy of someone who'd seen too much corruption for her age. When I slid the documents across the table, her eyes hardened. "This isn't sloppiness," she said after a minute. "This is structured fraud. See the approval intervals? They're uniform. That's a script, Ethan. Somebody automated your credentials." Her tone dropped. "And if Marcus is involved, Paul knows. He signs nothing without control." We talked for 2 hours, mapping every inconsistency, duplicate vendor entries, phantom accounts, and fake invoice batches routed through dormant clients. Clara offered to help quietly, using her contacts in external auditing networks. She knew a forensic accountant, Daniel Harper, who sometimes freelanced for whistleblower investigations. "He's not corporate," she said. "He works in shadows, but he's clean." I hesitated. The moment I brought an outsider in, it would stop being a personal fight. It would become exposure. But maybe that was what I needed, a mirror they couldn't control. That night, I emailed Daniel. I didn't use my name at first, just attached fragments of data trails with the note, "Need verification on forged signatures. Internal access may be compromised." He replied within an hour. "Meet me. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. cafe near Lincoln Square." When I arrived, he was already there. Middle-aged, quiet eyes, the kind of man who notices everything but speaks sparingly. I told him the story, carefully, like laying out a crime scene. When I showed him the timestamps and metadata gaps, he didn't look surprised. "They used a credential mirror," he said. "Custom script, old trick. But here's the thing. You can prove it if you find a session conflict." "A what?" "2 logins from the same user at the same time," he explained. "Impossible unless someone cloned your access key. If that exists, the audit trail itself is the evidence. You just have to get the raw server logs before they're wiped." That was the problem. Those logs were stored inside Greybridge's private IT vault. Marcus's domain. I couldn't just ask for them. But Clara had a key. 3 nights later, I sat in my darkened apartment, VPN active, remote access tunneling through an old maintenance credential Clara had supplied. It was like breaking into my own house. Line by line, I scrolled through the raw activity logs. Thousands of entries, login IDs, timestamps, IP addresses. Then I saw it. March 17, 2:13 a.m. User, CFO EU/IP address, 172.16.54.02. March 17, 2:13 a.m. User, CFO EU/IP address, 172.16.54.45. 2 simultaneous logins under the same identity. My hands froze on the keyboard. There it was, irrefutable proof that someone had cloned my session credentials and used them to execute the embezzlement. I exhaled slowly, feeling a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't anger anymore, it was precision. I compiled the data, encrypted it twice, and sent it to Daniel with one line: "Session conflict confirmed. Proceed discreetly." The next morning, I woke to a single text from him: "You're not crazy. They're laundering through shell vendors. I'll build you a case." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like gravity shift back in my favor. The air in my apartment felt different, less suffocating. The cracks in their story were widening, and soon, the entire structure would collapse. But I also knew what would come next, the moment they realized I was fighting back. And when they did, they wouldn't just try to discredit me, they'd try to erase me completely. The morning after Daniel confirmed the session conflict, I woke up with that rare, dangerous feeling, momentum. It had been weeks since I felt it. Proof wasn't vindication yet, but it was ammunition. And I was done being the target. Daniel wanted to move fast. Before they know you're onto them, he'd said, you have a window. After that, they'll start scrubbing. He was right. Corporate fraud runs on two things, confidence and time. Once fear enters, systems get cleaned, logs vanish, witnesses forget. I needed something bigger than digital evidence, something physical, undeniable, something that couldn't be rewritten. That's when I remembered the ledger room. At Greybridge, we maintained one old-fashioned practice, a hardbound, physical ledger used as a redundant record for major financial transfers. It wasn't mandatory, but Marcus loved to show it off to auditors as proof of transparency. I'd signed it hundreds of times over the years. It was a ritual, ink signatures beside transfer IDs. If someone had forged my authorizations digitally, they would have had to fake my physical entries, too. But there was a catch, that ledger was kept in a locked cabinet in the finance archive, behind 2 levels of access. And since my termination, my keycard was useless. Still, I knew who had keys, Elena, the senior accountant, and Marcus himself. Elena had always respected me, but after the scandal broke, she'd gone silent. Too afraid to pick sides. So I made contact another way. I waited until a Friday afternoon, when I knew she'd be closing out the week's statements. I called her office line from a prepaid phone, disguising my voice slightly through a filter. Elena, I said softly, check the March 17th entry in the physical ledger. Under vendor Kavara Logistics. A pause. Then a whisper, who is this? Someone who knows what you saw. She hung up. I thought I'd lost her, until 2 hours later, an anonymous email arrived. There's something wrong with that page. Ink's different. Corners torn. Please don't contact me again. Attached was a photo. The page showed my signature, but it was too neat. The loops and pressure didn't match my hand. More importantly, the date on the corner was in a different pen, darker, fresher. Whoever forged it had done it recently. That image became my smoking gun. The physical forgery proved intent, not error. I sent it to Daniel, who called me within minutes. Ethan, this is huge. The ink difference alone proves tampering. You've got both digital and manual falsification. That's systemic fraud. But Daniel wasn't the only one watching. That same evening, I noticed something odd. My phone, my personal one, began to overheat during calls. A small delay appeared when typing passwords. Subtle signs, but I'd seen them before when IT ran silent monitoring tools during audits. Someone had installed remote access spyware. They were tracking me. I didn't panic. Instead, I turned it into an opportunity. I created a decoy folder on my desktop titled Audit_Notes_Final. Inside, I placed false leads, dead-end spreadsheets, and one deliberately misleading document, a fabricated report suggesting I was planning to leak data to a rival logistics firm. It was bait. Within 48 hours, the folder was accessed remotely. I watched the log entry appear through Daniel's monitoring tool, unauthorized session initiated, IP trace, Greybridge corporate proxy. They'd taken the bait. Daniel laughed when I told him. Good. That means they're scared. Fear makes people sloppy. He was right again. Because 2 days later, Clara called me with news that would change everything. They've been moving assets, she said. Paul authorized a silent capital shift to an offshore subsidiary. I recognize the pattern, same vendor structure as Kavara. He's moving the stolen funds out before the audit closes. How much? I asked. Close to $1.2 million. I sat in silence, my jaw tightening. They weren't just framing me, they were preparing to walk away rich, leaving me ruined in the ashes. That night, I went back into my archives. Hidden deep inside my old project folders was something even I'd forgotten, ledger_backup. XLSX, a file created automatically each time the physical ledger was updated through our internal scanner. It recorded before and after versions of every entry, complete with metadata from the scanner hardware. When I opened it, my heart started racing. The March 17th entry, the same one Elena photographed, had 2 versions. The original, time-stamped March 17th, 11:32 a.m., and a second revision from April 6, 10:09 p.m. that was 3 weeks after my suspension. Someone had physically scanned and replaced that page, after I was already locked out. Daniel nearly shouted when I told him. That's it, Ethan. That's irrefutable tampering. If you can tie that April 6th activity to a user ID or internal network timestamp, you've got them cornered. Clara helped me trace the scanner logs. Every scan created an automated email receipt to the finance archive system, stored under a hidden folder labeled Document Integrity Verification. And the April 6th entry? Logged by M. Sharp, Marcus. The trap was snapping shut. I stared at his name on my screen for a long time, feeling that cold calm again. They'd stolen from the company, framed me, and buried the evidence under layers of fake compliance. But their arrogance had left a trail too clean to hide. I printed the proof and sealed it in a plain envelope. On the front, I wrote a single name, Paul. If Marcus had forged my signature, Paul had sanctioned it. And now, I needed to see the look in his eyes when he realized the man he tried to destroy was the one holding his career, and his freedom, in his hands. The hidden ledger wasn't just evidence. It was the first domino. And I had just tipped it over. By the time Monday came, I knew they felt it, the tremor of exposure. Fraud thrives in silence, but I'd cracked their quiet. Every move I made from that point had to be invisible, precise, and patient. Because once Paul and Marcus realized I had evidence, they'd lock the gates of Greybridge tighter than ever. I started the week with a simple goal: access the company's internal communications archive. Emails, message logs, anything that showed the timeline of their cover-up. But the moment I tried connecting through the remote tunnel Clara had set up, I hit a wall, an updated encryption barrier. Marcus had changed the company's firewall protocols over the weekend. Every credential, every route that had once opened doors for me was dead. It wasn't coincidence. They knew. I could almost picture it, Marcus pacing in his office, barking at the IT team, pretending it was routine maintenance, while Paul watched from the glass wall of the executive floor, calm but calculating. That's how he worked, never dirtying his hands, just giving quiet approvals and letting others execute the ugliness. But I'd learned long ago that the higher you build your walls, the louder the echoes when they fall. So I changed tactics. If I couldn't go through their firewall, I'd go around it. Daniel introduced me to an independent cybersecurity specialist he trusted, a man named Vikram, a former data forensics consultant who'd helped whistleblowers secure leaks against corporate surveillance. Vikram was cautious, skeptical at first. But once I showed him the metadata from Marcus's forged scan logs, he exhaled slowly and said, "They messed up. This isn't just an internal fraud. It's money laundering. And if that's true, you don't need their permission to prove it, you need their digital fingerprints." He built a mirrored trace for me, an algorithmic watcher that could piggyback on open company subdomains still linked to my old credentials. It was like slipping a thin wire through the cracks of a locked safe. Every time Greybridge's servers sent outgoing data, emails, reports, backups, our trace recorded the packet headers. Within 24 hours, we had something. A compressed archive had been sent from Greybridge's compliance department to a private address hosted on an encrypted server registered in the Cayman Islands. It was labeled innocuously as operational_backup_q1.zip. Inside that archive, Vikram found hundreds of falsified invoices and corresponding transfers, each pointing to Kavara Logistics and two new shell vendors, Bluestone Exports and Eastmar Capital Partners. The scale of it stunned me. This wasn't a few $100,000. It was a full-scale siphoning operation, over $3.8 million diverted through fake vendors in less than a year. Every transaction bore my forged approval. Paul wasn't just covering up theft, he was orchestrating it. And Marcus, ever the obedient executor, had built the digital maze to keep everyone else out. But their maze had a flaw. The Cayman server still carried its SSL certificate, an automatic registration that required a verifiable admin identity. And that identity belonged to Paul Reynolds, the CEO himself. Vikram stared at the screen, almost impressed. "They got greedy," he said. "And greed leaves fingerprints." The next day, I sent Clara a secure message: "We're going to burn their firewall from the inside." She replied almost instantly, "You're sure you're ready for this? Once you light it, there's no turning back." I typed back one line: "I've been ready since they took my name." That night, we executed the breach. Vikram ran the trace injection while I coordinated with Daniel, who drafted the skeleton of a formal report, one that would stand in court if we got caught. Within minutes, the mirrored traffic started flowing. Internal memos. Executive chats. Deleted archives being quietly transferred to external drives. And in one buried message chain, dated 3 days before my suspension, Marcus had written to Paul: "Audit window closing next week. Adjust timestamps for Kavara entries before Ethan flags them. He's been asking too many questions. Already done, Paul replied. Make sure he's isolated before quarter close. The words hit like a punch. They hadn't discovered irregularities, they'd created them. And the decision to destroy me wasn't reactive. It was planned. Deliberate. Weeks in advance. I stared at the screen, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, not anger, not even vindication. Just clarity. Daniel's voice came through my headset. Ethan, we've got enough to go to federal authorities. No, I said quietly. Not yet. He hesitated. Why not? Because if we hand it over now, Paul will settle quietly. He'll pay fines, shift blame to Marcus, and vanish rich. I want something they can't bury. Something public. That's when the next step took shape. We would force Greybridge into an independent external audit, one outside their control. To do that, we needed pressure. Media pressure. Clara suggested a journalist she trusted, Renee Shaw, an investigative reporter who'd covered corporate corruption cases for years. If we could feed her enough verifiable data, without revealing my identity yet, she could start pulling at the threads from her side. But there was a risk. The moment Renee published anything, Greybridge would go into panic mode. They'd lock down every system, shred documents, possibly even attempt to smear me further. So before we went public, we had to secure all the digital evidence. Vikram began cloning the company's remote backup drives in real time through a hidden relay. But midway through the process, his monitor flickered. They're tightening the net, he muttered. They've spotted the latency. Marcus must have noticed unusual outbound data. He looked at me sharply. You've got maybe 20 minutes before they cut all access permanently. Then give me what you've got, I said. He nodded, transferred the clone drives to an encrypted portable, and handed it to me. This is the firewall's heartbeat, he said. Once they kill it, only this remains. 23 minutes later, the screen went black. Greybridge's entire internal network went offline to external connections. Marcus had slammed the gates shut. But it was already too late. I walked out into the night carrying their secrets on a single drive, every forged invoice, every hidden transaction, every thread leading to Paul's Cayman account. The firewall that was supposed to protect them had become my fortress. They thought they'd silenced me. They didn't realize I'd already broken their system from within. When you spend years managing ledgers and compliance records, you learn one truth: numbers never lie, people do. They bend them, twist them, dress them up, but somewhere, the math still tells the truth. You just have to know where to listen. By the time Greybridge's internal network went dark, I was holding enough evidence to light up a courtroom. But I wasn't done. I needed something that would not just prove the fraud, I needed to connect every missing dollar to Paul and Marcus personally. Not just their signatures. Their hands. Daniel called me the morning after the firewall lockdown. The data drive's solid, he said. But before we go public, we need traceability. A clean audit trail. Every accusation has to line up with a timestamp and an account route, or they'll spin it as coincidence. Traceability. That was my native language. I spent the next week constructing what I called the chain, a timeline from the first fake transfer to the final offshore movement. It stretched across 18 months, dozens of vendors, and more than $4.1 million in fraudulent disbursements. The pattern was clear: every vendor that received a payment under my credentials sent the funds to a second account registered under either Eastmar, Kavara, or Bluestone, all Cayman-based entities under the same administrative trust. Daniel confirmed it with external banking data. This trust is controlled by a shell company called Greybridge Holdings, incorporated under a Singapore business address, he said. And guess who the signatories are? I didn't answer. I already knew. Paul Reynolds and Marcus Sharp, he said flatly. They'd built a carousel of fake vendors to bleed the company dry, and the moment I caught on, they needed a scapegoat. I wasn't just convenient. I was perfect. CFO access, spotless record, and too trusting of the system I'd built. Clara, meanwhile, was helping from inside. She still had a few friends buried in Greybridge's lower ranks, people disillusioned by the company's hypocrisy. One of them, an IT admin named Reese, reached out through an encrypted app. His message was short. They're deleting backups. Everything older than 3 months is being purged under storage optimization. Thought you should know. That was their cleanup operation. Reese agreed to help us pull what remained from the internal audit drive before it was wiped. He worked nights, posing as maintenance staff, secretly copying logs onto an external SSD. Each file he saved was another nail in their coffin: message logs, deleted email caches, even Paul's calendar notes. One calendar entry in particular stood out. Client meeting, Greybridge, Cayman, 0213, Marcus to finalize. That date matched one of the biggest fraudulent transfers. We were connecting dots they didn't even realize existed outside their firewall. Still, we needed credibility. The world doesn't listen to disgraced employees or anonymous data analysts, it listens to verified audits. That's when Renee Shaw entered the picture. Clara arranged a quiet meeting in a hotel cafe downtown. Renee was sharp-eyed, mid-40s, with a voice that carried both confidence and exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing too many lies for too many years. I handed her a sanitized copy of the evidence, no names yet, just data. She flipped through it quickly. "This is airtight," she murmured. "But if I publish this without on-record sources, they'll bury me in defamation suits." "I'll go on record," I said. Clara and Daniel both looked at me like I'd just volunteered to jump into a fire. Renee raised an eyebrow. "You understand what that means? They'll come after you harder." "They already did," I replied. "Now I'm returning the favor." She smiled slightly, like she'd heard that line before, but rarely from someone who meant it. Over the next week, Renee began her own verification process. She contacted regulatory experts, cross-referenced corporate filings, and even ran a quiet query through a source in the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. The feedback was immediate. Greybridge Holdings was already on their radar for suspicious activity. That confirmation was the match we needed. But before Renee could publish anything, we needed one final piece, something that linked the forged digital authorizations directly to a physical action by Marcus or Paul. Proof that couldn't be blamed on technical errors. Daniel found it buried deep in the cloned logs, a session capture from March 17, the same night the forged transactions occurred. The log contained an IP conflict, but also a security camera ping. Greybridge's internal system automatically captured workstation footage during high-value transfer sessions for compliance. The footage showed Marcus sitting at my CFO workstation. The timestamp, 2:13 a.m. He wasn't supposed to have access to that office, let alone my system. The grainy frame showed his reflection on the monitor as he authorized the transfers, my credentials visible on the screen. That was the endgame proof. The kind of evidence that breaks careers. Renee watched the footage silently in Daniel's studio. When it ended, she leaned back, expression unreadable. "This," she said softly, "will ruin them." We all knew what came next. Renee would prepare the story, cross-verify every claim, and coordinate with FinCEN for confirmation. Once it went live, it wouldn't just expose them internally, it would ignite a federal investigation. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because exposure isn't justice, it's a spark. And sparks can start wildfires if not controlled. That night, as I walked home under the cold city lights, my phone buzzed again, another unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Ethan," the voice said, calm, steady. "You don't know what you're doing. Stop now, and this disappears." I recognized the tone. Paul. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten me outright. He didn't need to. Power doesn't yell, it whispers, confident you'll listen. But I'd already spent weeks listening to their lies. "Then I guess," I said quietly, "I'm done disappearing." And I hung up. I walked the rest of the way in silence, the city lights reflecting off the river like static. The audit trail was complete. Every number, every timestamp, every lie, chained together into one inescapable truth. Next came the trap. The moment Renee confirmed she was publishing, time seemed to slow down. Every hour felt stretched, heavy with anticipation and danger. We weren't just exposing corporate fraud, we were about to detonate a bomb in the middle of Greybridge's spotless public image. But before we could push the button, we needed to make sure that when it exploded, it couldn't be disarmed. That meant redundancy, multiple backups, multiple witnesses, multiple release paths. I called it Operation Mirror. Daniel handled the data verification, ensuring every transaction, every signature, every video frame matched the audit trail we'd compiled. Clara was our silent insider, feeding us quiet confirmations from within Greybridge's nervous ranks. Renee prepared the article, a comprehensive exposé titled "The CFO Who Was Framed," inside Greybridge's $4 million fraud. It was all set to publish at 9 a.m. Monday morning. But by Friday night, something shifted. Clara called me in a whisper. "Ethan, they're panicking. Marcus is shredding documents. Literally shredding. They brought in private security to guard the finance floor. And Paul, he's not in Chicago. He flew out this morning to D.C. For what he called emergency investor talks. Investor talks. The phrase alone reeked of desperation. He was trying to buy silence, or distance, or both. That night, I barely slept. I sat on my couch with my laptop open, watching the city flicker through the blinds. There was one thing still missing, a direct line of accountability. If Paul ran, he could claim ignorance. He'd blame Marcus for acting alone, a rogue compliance officer gone bad. I needed to prove Paul knew. At 2:47 a.m., I found it. Buried in the cloned backup logs was an internal email thread labeled Budget Reconciliation Anomalies. The subject looked harmless, but the contents were lethal. It was a conversation between Paul and Marcus, and it contained my name. Paul, Ethan's asking too many questions again. If he traces Kavara, we'll have to accelerate the handoff. Marcus, understood. Should I alter the access logs again? Paul, yes. And make it look like he signed off. Use the older signature hash, it matched last time. I read those lines 3 times, letting the words carve into me. They hadn't just framed me, they'd discussed it casually, like it was a line item in a meeting agenda. When I sent the thread to Daniel and Renee, both went silent. Finally, Daniel said, "This isn't just fraud. This is conspiracy. Deliberate falsification of records. This could put them away." Renee's reply came a moment later. "We're going live Monday no matter what. But you need to be ready, Ethan. Once it hits, they'll come for you." "Let them," I said. "I'm done hiding." Saturday passed in eerie calm. No calls, no messages, no movement. The storm before the reckoning. Then Sunday morning, everything imploded. Clara called, panicked. They found out about Renee. Someone at FinCan leaked the inquiry back to Paul's legal team. He's furious. He called an emergency board meeting tomorrow, before the article drops. They're planning to officially terminate you for cause and file criminal charges preemptively. He was trying to turn the tables before we could expose him. Classic strategy, attack the whistleblower first, discredit, disorient, delay. But it was already too late for him. At 3 p.m., Renee texted me a single word, "Ready?" I typed back, "Do it." She sent the draft to her editor with every document attached, including the email thread that proved intent. Once the publisher verified the metadata, the servers queued the article for automatic release. It was live on multiple mirrored domains, no one could pull it down. I sat by the window, laptop open, watching the countdown timer tick toward 9 a.m. At 8:43, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Ethan. It was Marcus this time. His voice trembled, a mix of anger and fear. "You don't know what you've started. Paul's already made arrangements. You think you'll win this? You're a dead man professionally. They'll bury you in lawsuits." "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I have your face on camera at my desk. 2:13 a.m., March 17th. You forged my signature while I was home asleep. You can threaten me all you want, but that video goes to every board member, regulator, and journalist at 9 a.m. sharp." He went silent. Then I heard him exhale, long, defeated. "You think Paul will fall with me?" he said finally. "He'll burn me first. Then maybe you should stop helping him burn everyone else." Click. He hung up. The call ended, but the silence it left behind was heavy, and telling. At 9:02, Renee's article went live. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Whistleblower CFO uncovers $4 million Greybridge fraud, CEO implicated in offshore embezzlement scheme, internal audit cover-up exposed. Screenshots flooded social media. Investors panicked. The board was forced into an emergency session. By 11 a.m., the company's website crashed from traffic. By noon, regulators were at their headquarters demanding access to financial records. At 2 p.m., Marcus resigned. At 4:17 p.m., Paul Reynolds was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. And at 6 p.m., I received an anonymous message through an encrypted channel. It contained a single file, a recorded audio clip. Paul's voice: "If this gets out, Marcus takes the fall. I'll make sure of it. No one touches me." He just handed me his confession. The setup was crumbling faster than even I'd planned. But the unraveling wasn't over, not yet. Because in corporate scandals like this, the fall is never clean. The higher they climb, the louder they break. And I was going to make sure the world heard every crack. When you expose powerful men, the real fight doesn't begin with headlines, it begins the moment they realize the headlines won't go away. Monday night proved it. Greybridge's PR team was in full denial mode, issuing press releases, threatening legal action, spinning the same rehearsed line. We are cooperating fully with regulators and have no evidence of internal misconduct. But I wasn't after statements. I was after collapse. By Tuesday morning, René's article had been shared by every major financial outlet in the country. Investor forums buzzed, stock tickers plummeted, and employees leaked internal memos in panic. Yet, as public as the scandal was becoming, Paul Reynolds still hadn't been arrested. He was hiding behind the wall of pending investigation, hoping time and money would dull the outrage. So I decided to accelerate the decay. The trap began quietly, with Marcus. He was cornered, desperate, and cut off. After his resignation, he tried to reach me twice, once through email, once through an encrypted message that read, "We need to talk. I can't go down alone." That was the first useful thing he'd said in months. I told Daniel and René we needed to record everything. Daniel set up a secure virtual meeting using an anonymized relay, untraceable, untamperable. We disguised it as a private settlement negotiation, giving Marcus the illusion that I was open to cutting a deal. At 7:30 p.m., the call began. Marcus's face appeared, pale and drawn. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his own lies had started to cave him in. "I didn't want it to go this far," he said, voice shaking. "Paul made the decisions. I just did what I was told." "Then prove it," I said. "Tell the truth on record." He hesitated. "If I talk, I lose everything. He'll destroy me." I leaned forward. "He already has." That silence lasted too long, then Marcus sighed, rubbing his eyes. "There's a private server, Ethan. Paul's personal vault. It holds transaction memos, executive chats, even the offshore transfer authorizations. But it's locked under his dual auth system. He keeps one key, his assistant keeps the other. If you can get access, you'll have everything." Daniel muted his mic, whispering to me off channel, "He's bluffing. But if that server exists, it's gold." "Where is it?" I asked. Marcus looked straight at the camera. "Corporate floor, sub-level archive room. Labeled retired infrastructure storage. You'll need physical access." He ended the call before I could say another word. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, feeling the familiar chill, not fear, but focus. Marcus might have been half lying, but every con contains a kernel of truth. If Paul had a private vault, it would explain how he controlled the scheme so completely. So we built the next stage of the trap. Clara would use her old clearance to enter the building as part of the records transition team. She still had contacts in facilities who owed her favors. Once inside, she'd locate the archive room and confirm if the server existed. Daniel would monitor remotely, guiding her through the access protocols. René coordinated with a Fin-Ken investigator who'd agreed to be on standby, ready to move if we found something concrete. It was reckless. It was illegal. It was necessary. Wednesday, 10:42 a.m. Clara messaged, "In. Room found. Vault confirmed." Then a photo followed, a small rack-mounted server unit labeled G-Archive-01, its network cables disconnected, dust on the casing. Exactly what Marcus described. She inserted the portable relay Daniel had given her, a disguised USB that would mirror the contents to our encrypted drive in real time. Then everything went wrong. The security alarm triggered. Not a fire alarm, a silent breach alert. Marcus had tipped them off. Clara's message came through fast, "They're here. 2 guards. Can't disconnect. Running copy incomplete." Daniel shouted over comms, "Pull the feed now. We've got 80% of the data. It's enough." Then her line went dead. For 30 agonizing minutes, we waited. Finally, a single message appeared, "Safe. Out via east exit. Copy stick lost." But Daniel's mirrored feed was still transferring. The data from the server streamed into our secure node like a digital pulse. File names began appearing. /confidential_memos/board_discussions_2024.pdf. /transfers/readridge_allocations. CSV. /personal_notes/CEO_directives. docx. When Daniel opened the last one, his face went white. "Ethan. You need to read this." It was a document written by Paul Reynolds himself, an internal directive ordering Marcus to execute quarterly asset reallocation through non-disclosed vendors under CFO authorization. He had literally written the blueprint for the fraud, and signed it. It wasn't just guilt. It was confession. By noon, we had everything mirrored and verified. Daniel's words were simple: "This is the nail in the coffin. That evening, I called Marcus one last time. He answered instantly, panicked. "You set me up," he hissed. "They know I talked to you." Paul's furious, he's threatening legal action. "Then you'd better get ahead of him," I said coldly. "You cooperate now, and you'll walk out with a deal. Otherwise, you'll share a cell." He said nothing. But I could hear it, the ragged breathing of a man realizing the game was over. By Friday morning, Renee had everything ready for the follow-up article, complete with the internal memos and Paul's own signed directives. But this time, we didn't stop there. Daniel submitted the full audit trail directly to FinCEN, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. When the news broke that afternoon, the reaction was instant. Greybridge's stock froze in trading. A federal injunction locked their accounts. Paul Reynolds' name trended across every major network. And Marcus Sharp? He was seen walking into the federal building downtown, escorted by 2 agents, eyes hollow, carrying a file box. The trap had sprung. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. But as the headlines multiplied and the company crumbled, one thought stayed with me: this wasn't justice yet. Justice doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in silence. In courtrooms. In the final reckoning. And that part, the reckoning, was still waiting. There's a moment, right after the truth detonates, when everything slows down. Like time itself holds its breath to see who will survive the blast. For Greybridge, that moment arrived at exactly 9 a.m., Friday morning, when the Department of Justice officially confirmed an ongoing criminal investigation into corporate fraud, wire tampering, and conspiracy to falsify records. For the first time, the name Paul Reynolds appeared in a federal press release. And beneath it, Marcus Sharp, Chief Compliance Officer, resigned. I remember staring at the words on my laptop, the rain streaking down the window beside me, the sound of distant sirens somewhere in the city. After months of humiliation, isolation, and accusation, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in a long time: validation. But it wasn't triumph. Not yet. Because truth, when exposed, doesn't end things, it begins the reckoning. Within hours, Greybridge's offices were swarming with investigators. The footage appeared on the evening news: black SUVs lined outside their downtown headquarters, agents carrying boxes of documents, escorted by uniformed officers. The image that once symbolized corporate power was now a crime scene. I didn't go near the building. I didn't need to. My work was already there, in every spreadsheet, every metadata trail, every mirrored backup. They were dismantling the house of cards I'd been forced to build. At 11:13 a.m., my phone buzzed. Renee's message came through: "It's official. The DOJ confirmed your cooperation. You're no longer under investigation. They're calling you the key whistleblower." I just stared at that word, whistleblower. It sounded noble. Clean. But it felt heavier than it looked. I hadn't done it for recognition. I did it because I couldn't live with their lie becoming my legacy. Still, I knew what that label meant: I was both hero and target. The backlash came fast. Paul's legal team issued a public statement claiming I had collaborated with rogue internal staff to falsify evidence. They called me vindictive, unstable, obsessed with revenge. The irony burned. But every smear they released made the truth louder. Renee's second article hit that night: headline: CEO's private memos and offshore accounts expose massive corporate embezzlement. The story included excerpts from Paul's own directives and the camera footage of Marcus forging my signature. The moment the footage hit air, it was over. Social media erupted. Investors withdrew. Employees revolted. By midnight, Greybridge's stock was suspended from trading. And then, the real breaking point: the press conference. Renee called me that morning. "They're holding one at 10 a.m. The board's trying to calm shareholders. You might want to watch." So I did. Paul stood behind the podium, a dozen microphones in front of him, reporters shouting questions. He looked worn, sleepless, the manicured polish gone. He started with his usual script: denial, confusion, talk of internal mismanagement. But then, a journalist, one of Renee's colleagues, shouted from the front. "Mr. Reynolds, can you explain your directive dated February 12, where you ordered Mr. Sharp to adjust audit trails under CFO authority? We have the document. Your signature's verified." The cameras flashed. Paul froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. He tried to recover, mumbling about context, but the damage was done. By noon, the board had voted to remove him as CEO. By 3 p.m., federal agents arrived at his home with a warrant. By 6 p.m., every news network in the country had the same headline. Greybridge CEO arrested in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme, whistleblower cleared of all allegations. The exposure was complete. Clara called me that evening, voice trembling with relief. "They're done, Ethan. It's over." But I didn't answer right away. I was staring at my reflection in the window, the city glowing beneath the night rain. "Not yet," I said quietly. "It's never over until the last lie dies." Because I knew Paul, men like him don't admit guilt, they bargain with it. He'd try to cut a deal, to shift blame, to paint himself as another victim of circumstance. And Marcus? He'd already started cooperating, trading testimony for leniency. That was fine. Let them tear each other apart. The truth didn't need my help anymore. It was feeding on their contradictions. The next morning, Renee sent me one last file, the final draft of her feature article, complete with a photo I hadn't seen before. It was the image of me, standing on the courthouse steps, talking to reporters. My face half shadowed by the sun, eyes tired, but steady. The caption read: "From accused to exonerated, the CFO who fought back." For a long time, I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Closure? None of it seemed real. But when I scrolled to the end of the article, I saw Renee's final line. "The truth, once buried, does not die. It waits for the patient, and punishes the powerful." I closed my laptop and leaned back, listening to the city hum. Greybridge was finished. Paul and Marcus would spend years untangling their own downfall. And I, the man they tried to erase, was suddenly the only name left standing. Still, there was one more thing I needed to do. Justice had been exposed. But now, it needed to speak. They say justice moves slowly, but when it finally arrives, it doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. 2 months after the arrests, I sat in a courtroom that smelled faintly of polished wood and cold air. The hum of quiet voices filled the space: reporters, attorneys, federal agents, and the broken remnants of Greybridge's board. I took my seat behind the prosecution, not as a defendant anymore, but as their witness. Paul Reynolds sat at the defense table, wearing the same immaculate suit he'd once worn to board meetings, only now, his wrists bore faint red marks where the cuffs had been. His posture was still regal, but the confidence was gone. The arrogance had curdled into something smaller, meaner, a man trying to shrink away from the truth closing in on him. Across from him sat Marcus Sharp, pale, exhausted, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. He'd already made a deal, full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. I'd read his statement, every line dripping with guilt, deflecting blame where he could, but still confirming the core truth: they had used my name, my system, and my reputation as their camouflage. When my name was called, I stood. The room quieted. The prosecutor's voice was calm. "State your name and occupation for the record." "Ethan Ward. Former Chief Financial Officer, Greybridge Freight Systems." I took a slow breath, my pulse steady. Then I began, walking the jury through 18 months of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. The forged vendor files. The mirrored logins. The midnight transactions. The physical ledger alteration. And finally, the camera footage, Marcus, at my desk, authorizing the fraudulent transfers while I was home asleep. Every piece was presented, each one heavier than the last. Paul avoided my gaze through most of it. But when the footage played on the overhead screen, he looked up, just for a moment. Our eyes met across the courtroom. There was no hatred left in me. No fury. Just the cold, quiet satisfaction of truth landing exactly where it was meant to. When the evidence of the CEO directives appeared, his own signed documents instructing Marcus to falsify the audit logs, I watched his expression shift. A flicker of disbelief, then resignation. His kingdom had fallen, and the walls were made of spreadsheets. The trial lasted 2 weeks. In that time, every illusion of his innocence collapsed. Former employees testified. Bank officials confirmed the offshore transfers. Regulators traced every dollar to Greybridge Holdings, under his signature. On the final day, the judge read the verdict aloud. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, falsification of records, and conspiracy. Paul Reynolds, the man who once ruled boardrooms with his smile, was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Marcus received 8, with probation and restitution. When the gavel struck, the room exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. I didn't celebrate. I simply stood, straightened my tie, and walked out of the courtroom into the sunlight. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions: how I felt, what I planned to do next, whether I forgave them. I gave no speeches, no soundbites. I just said, Truth doesn't need forgiveness. It just needs proof. Then I walked away. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Greybridge collapsed under lawsuits and federal seizures. The employees who'd stayed loyal found new homes in rival firms. The company's name was stripped from its headquarters, its logo taken down. But I didn't return to corporate life. I couldn't. That chapter had burned with everything else. Instead, I founded something new, a non-profit audit network called the Integrity Ledger, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and investigating corporate financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The system that destroyed me became the system I used to protect others. 6 months later, I received a check from the Department of Justice's Whistleblower Compensation Fund, $1.4 million. A fraction of what had been stolen, but enough to rebuild a life. I didn't feel rich. I felt clean. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay that final courtroom moment in my head, not out of vengeance, but as a reminder of the cost of silence. The cost of letting power hide behind paperwork. And I remembered what Renee had told me once, when this all began. Justice isn't about revenge, Ethan. It's about making the truth too loud to bury. I finally understood what she meant. In the end, justice didn't roar, it whispered. In every number I'd restored, every record I'd unburied, every lie I'd exposed, it whispered my name. And for the first time since that morning in HR, when they took my badge and called me a thief, I finally felt free.